Pavel, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to episode 12 of the Engineering Evolved podcast. My name is Brandon E. Grant, and as always, I'm here with Pavel, my co-host, Pavel Krupa. Pavel, you look like you're in a little bit different environment tonight.
Yes, I am a little bit in a rush. However, I just wanted to say, like, it's always possible to accomplish something if you really want. Just have to accommodate time and location to it.
Yep. And so if you know that you have a podcast you want to go through and you've got a car, you can go sit in your car and run a podcast.
That's the thing. That's the beauty of the internet nowadays. Like, if you have to do something, you can do it anywhere. Doesn't matter where you are.
Absolutely. So the topic of today's conversation, last week we talked about meditation. Inside of my coaching business, inside of my coaching structure, I have these different things that I have in terms of each department. So we talked a little bit about body. We talked a little bit about brain. The third one is being, right? Who are you being? Your spirituality, things like that. And for me, there's two main components there. One of them is meditation, and the other one is journaling or memoirs, right? So today's title is, Should I Be Talking to Myself? Now, I put a fun little quote on the invite here that said, I used to think the crazy ones were the people who talk to themselves. Now I realize the crazy ones are the ones that don't. What comes up for you when I say that? Like, is that something you agree with? Because that's just a quote that I came up with.
I think it's a good quote. And I do talk to myself a lot. Even like during when we talk about mental, but also doing like this regular workouts. I do talk to myself sometimes just to hear what I said. And one thing I notice is there is a big difference if you just keep repeating it in your mind, or when you say it out loud or write it down on a paper. It has totally different power in my experience.
100%. So, let's ease into this with a useful example that I think our engineer audience will understand, right? You know and love, some people who employ this, but you know about the rubber duck method, right? You aware of what this is?
I'm not sure. You can enlighten.
But you know that you work with people who there's a lot of rubber ducks, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the rubber duck method is a software engineering tool, a coding, a programming tool, where what you do is you imagine as you're writing code by yourself solo, you basically take and you stop and you explain to this little rubber duck right here. Meet the rubber duck. We'll throw that in the edits. You talk and you have a conversation and you explain your code line by line to this rubber duck. And what that does is it goes from in your brain, just processing neurons firing, whatever, and it puts it into a mode of actually having to speak it out loud, right? Mm-hmm. It goes from thought, which is not real, into actuality, into reality, which is words, either verbal or written, right? Like it's creation of, it's expanding from a thought idea to an actual statement idea. And in doing so, you explain to the rubber duck what's going on line by line. And as you explain it, one, you have to know what's going on. And two, how many times have you sent an email or sent a message and then you go back and you read it, you're like, I made like 8 typos. I did it like 3 times on one message today, right? When you go and review and you either read in, you change the mode, or you speak or you write, it gives you a chance to take and look at this thought that you had in your brain. And so that's an example that I learned the rubber duck method from people that we've worked with, right? The advantage of the rubber duck method, it gives you an opportunity to review your code by yourself by explaining it and having to explain through it. It's a great debugging tool for programming. So let's take this engineering concept, as we've talked about, and let's move that into how to apply it in our own life, right? So that's one of the big things I always push on is, engineers are these brilliant problem solvers, and yet oftentimes we tend to be completely incapable of solving problems in our own personal life, right? It makes no sense. And it's because a lot of times we haven't learned how to do that. So for me, this becomes journaling or memoirs. And a very specific tool I use is called the Stack. Now we'll get back to that. Do you have a journaling practice? Do you have a diary or a journal you write in, or electronic digital notes thing that you just kind of whatever? I've heard people call them paper brains before. Do you have a place where you can take your thoughts, this mishmash of all this stuff up here, and actually put it onto paper or into bits and bytes and electrons somewhere?
Yeah, I would just use either, if I have like a specific time where I do my reflections, goals, and so on, then I put it on the paper. But during the day, if there's like a thought or something, I'll just put it down on the any app that takes notes on a phone.
Got it. And what do you find that gives you this process of taking it from your brain and putting it onto paper or putting it into a digitized version?
So, yeah, first of all, it gives you like I would say, realization that, okay, that happened, and a note for the future. However, one thing I found is ourselves, when we take notes about ourselves, those might be kind of disturbed sometimes. And what I found, what's more helpful for me, is when I'm getting feedback from my peers or for the people I work with.
Okay.
So sometimes I observe like behaviors when I communicate with others. And when I get some feedback back, that's sometimes what I will note. Because what I came up with is like, okay, I was writing down my thoughts, I was writing down what I think, and so on and so on. However, after some time, I've noticed that this is how I see the world, but that's not how people can see what I'm trying to explain to them.
Right.
So to give you like a good example is, for example, if you're gaining weight slowly and you're like within your family, people might not notice until some point. Yeah. But if you're going to your family that you haven't seen in like 6 months or even shorter, like maybe a month or two, they will see that difference immediately. So it's kind of the same thing, that you're used to some things, you're used to being you. And sometimes it's hard to realize that something is going wrong. Of course, you will get some like the more you're aware about yourself, the more you're aware about like contact with people, the easier for you it will be to notice the differences. However, as an add-on to just like self-reflection, I like to add what I heard from peers or like what I heard from people that I met or some behaviors.
Right. Christian says hello. Welcome again, Christian. Yeah, 100%. So making notes and being able to see and everything else there, that's really cool. Being able to put it out there and observe it lets you view it bias, and then being able to come back to it later, right?
Yes. Exactly.
There's this fantastic book called The Untethered Soul, right? It's a pretty spiritual book, but this concept that he has in there, it's amazing. He has this concept of, there was a before time for me, right? Where I identified 100% that I am my brain. My sense of self and my sense of being was completely centered in my brain, right? I didn't know that I was separate from my brain. And now I say it out loud and I'm like, that sounds insane. But that's where I lived for the first 35 years of my life, right? I thought I was my brain. And this book talks about, your brain and your thoughts aren't actually real. Like the things that your brain comes up with, those not everything there is real. And the example is, he says, okay, imagine that your brain, this talking voice inside of your head, imagine it's sitting next to you on the couch watching TV, right? And imagine it's a person who's sitting next to you on your TV, and every thought you have in your head is being spoken by the person next to you, right? What would that experience be? Well, it wouldn't be very long where you would be in a place of complete frustration that it never stops talking, right? Your friend that you're sitting on the couch watching TV never stops talking, right? That would be observation 1. Observation 2 is this friend next to you talking is completely a lunatic. Set by the example of how willing they are to switch their perspective and their conviction instantaneously, right? I love this person. They're so amazing. They're such a fantastic soul. You learn one little piece or a slight change in perspective, and it's this person is the most evil being on the planet. And these things in our brain, the stories and the words that our brain passes to us change rapidly and like giant dramatics. Like imagine listening and observing to that friend, right?
Yeah.
So in that scenario, in that observation, in that thought experiment, if you were asked, should I take advice from this friend sitting on the couch next to me, right? Should I take like major life advice from that friend?
Yeah, normally no, yeah, because what you heard is like just lunatic, yeah.
Yeah. And yet the advice that we most often take is from the current process and the current thing happening in our brain, right?
Yeah.
That perspective, that visualization, I've said it before on here and I'll say it again. There's this idea that the internal world creates the external experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is different than most people think about, and it's different than I used to think about before I learned, right? The internal world is dictated by the stories I tell myself, right? And so the benefit of taking and writing things down is it catches the perspective in the moment. There's nothing wrong with the perspective. It's just what kind of value do you give it?
Yep.
So when you take and you write a note down about how whatever, like encaptured in that note and that observation is your current state of mind. So then you get to come back later and you read it and you're like, wow, I must have been really grumpy that day. Or, oh, I can't believe I thought about that person. Or, wow, this is a major insight that I missed because I was in the moment, and now I can use this as a really valuable tool, right?
Yep.
Just like the rubber duck, it lets you take and put what's ever happening in here and put it out here for you to look at. It's fantastic, right?
Yeah. The only thing I would like to say is it does require you to have some type of knowledge to notice the behavior patterns that you were feeling okay that day, yeah? Because if you're doing it under stress or like, it should be done as a reflection. And when you're reading it again, it should be in the time where you're kind of relaxed and you don't have any incoming factors that can affect your emotions or like your being at the time, because then again, it can become a little bit disturbed. And one more thing I wanted to add to what you said regarding looking at your brain from the outside. It's also quite funny that in reality, there is no future and past. It's only now. But we tend to spend so much time thinking about future or the past, whereas in reality, we should focus on now as well.
Absolutely. That presence conversation that we talked about from meditation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Paul, I don't know if you can see the comments on your side, but we had a comment from Dave that said, but your brain is trying to process through something. So if you don't give it value and address it, there is a problem. And so what I think I understand there is that, yeah, in the moment, your brain is trying to process, it's a different situation. Your brain is trying to process through something, right? And so you have to give it some value and address it. But there's this false finding that everything that is your brain is trying to process is necessarily true. It requires processing, but it doesn't necessarily have value. You need to assess the value of what's happening. You need to assess the value of what your brain is trying to process in the current moment, right? Yep. What are your thoughts on that?
But I would say one more thing onto that comment. That is true. However, now again, it come to a point where you'll process it differently depending on what's happening around you. So, like we said in previous podcasts, like if you're under a stress situation or you're between the family members or you're maybe between strangers, depending what the incoming input is, how you perceive it is going to be different and it's going to vary. So now it comes to the question like, okay, you have to give it a value and address it. Like Dave said, yes, but the value and addressing will depend on the situations that are around you. And it's very hard sometimes to always judge everything with your calm mind, because it's just impossible to keep that calm state all the time. Yep. So, yeah, I would add
So,
this
and
the comments.
yeah, it's a great comment. Now, so there is a problem. That is a problem. Now, here's the fun part. How do you address this problem? How do you get in the practice of being able to take what's in your brain and pull it out and look at it and be able to address the thing that's going on in your brain objectively without just believing everything that your brain says, right?
Yep.
My answer, what I've found it to be, is actually what we're talking about. It is a journaling practice. And it's a practice. It becomes something you have to do. So this is where I'll introduce this tool that I use called the Stack, right? Now, the Stack and the version, the format that I use is something from Garrett J. White of Wake Up Warrior. They created it. It's in the software that I run my clients through. And what it is it's a cognitive behavior therapy tool, right? It's a series of questions that I go in and I ask myself and I talk to myself about. Hey, what is the event that triggered this? What are the emotions that you're feeling? What are the facts about the situation? What do you want to say to this? And it's just a series of questions where you go in and analyze an event. And what it does is, as you do this daily, it's a daily practice. As you do this, you're training your brain to objectively look at and create that pause, like we talked about last week, right? What do cows drink? Well, cows drink water, unless, as Christian said, it's a baby cow, right? But you're giving yourself the training to take a pause and look at what's happening in your brain objectively. So I've had somebody when I was at Tesla, I worked with somebody who's like, how is it that you can take a situation and process and communicate effectively about what's going on right now? And the answer is my journaling practice, my Stack process. So, to put this in perspective, I've done 1,700 stacks, right? 1,700 times I've sat down in software and I've started with an event, an emotion, a feeling, whatever. And I've processed through this series of questions. It's either 20 minutes, sometimes up to an hour and a half or 2 for the really deep ones. So let's say it's 30 minutes on average, which is an underestimate, right? That means I've spent 850 hours over the last 5 years having a conversation with my brain with a therapy-based tool as a journaling practice, taking what's going on in here, pulling it out, looking at it, saying, okay, what's happening? Why, what do we need to do? What's relevant? What do we want out of this situation, right? And so Dave's 100%. There's a problem if you don't give it value, but you have to learn how to look at what it's processing and then be objectively able to identify what's relevant, what's important, and what's not, right?
Yeah, I want to add one more thing onto. So that's something from my perspective, and that's something I struggle with for some time. So when we talk about this, often emotions are some triggers for our actions or our perspective. However, what I've noticed is not always everybody knows what an emotion is.
Right.
So what's good, because there's only X amount of emotions. So what I've done before is, like, when I had hard time finding what up, like, I wrote down all of the emotions and whatever was going on, then I was kind of analyzing and seeing if, like, what emotion is actually associated with the action. And then this kind of helped me to develop and understand better emotions in terms of, like, what do I really feel when something happens? Like, was I angry at that person, or maybe something else happened that made me angry, and that's how I perceive the second person? Of course, it requires a lot of time, a lot of practice, a lot of understanding of yourself. However, it was a good starting point for me, like writing down the emotions, or writing down what can you feel when something happens, and then actually associating that action with the emotion.
100%. That's a great tool, Pavel, because the practice, the Stack, starts with, you talk about what happened, and then you isolate out the facts separate from emotions, right?
Yep.
And then you talk about the feelings of those facts, right?
Yep.
So we could do an entire thing on stacks. And if anybody's interested in learning how to stack or wants to know access to this tool, I'll take a moment here to please reach out. This is part of the coaching that I do. This is part of what I teach, what I use daily, what I'm teaching to my current clients, and what I teach to everybody that comes through is this process of the Stack. It's a therapy tool that is amazing, and it's a question. It's with yourself, and it's the best person to talk to, right? So to answer the question of the podcast, should I be talking to myself? For me, the answer is 100% yes. But you touched on something, Pavel, that I want to touch off, and then we've got some announcements to do here at the end of the podcast as well. You talked about this idea of interacting with a second person in the state of anger and not understanding whether it's them or the first person, right?
Yep.
Here's the extreme example that I know that I experienced as an engineer that I still have to be very cognizant of, right? I have a rough, long day at work. That happens to us all the time. Somebody said something, a project's not going well. I have an issue, something breaks, something always breaks, a rough day. And I go home. If I'm not very careful and very diligent, let's say I leave work angry because I just had a hard day and I go home and I walk in and my kid or my wife or somebody says something that normally might be somewhat neutral, right? If I walk in and I carry that anger, guess what ends up happening? I probably, and I have in the past 100%, lost my shit and yelled or got upset or got angry and actually outwardly reacted in this negative emotional state towards the people who had nothing to do with the situation, right?
Yep.
And so a minor annoyance by somebody who I love then becomes a big problem because I took my work home or I took my emotions home into the environment. I didn't take care of me because my anger is my problem. I didn't take care of my anger and then unleashed it on the people who I love the most, right?
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing onto it because there was a long time when I was not aware, like some long time ago, when I was not aware about this. I was not aware about changing from work to home. Like I didn't see the line. And that's another thing that's, I think, very helpful. Like you mentioned, being aware, like when you're at work, be at work. When you're at home, you're at home. However, we understand that sometimes there'll be situations where you're unable to actually cope with the stress that happened at work. And you cannot just walk through home and like suddenly change your mind because it was like it's had such a big effect on you that you cannot just disconnect. So it's important then to just mention this to your family or whoever you live with that, hey, probably right now I'm dealing with this or that. So they are aware. I'm trying to be present, but I'm unable still to be here because of what happened before. Of course, this requires a lot of practice and requires you to be aware of your feelings, being aware of your emotions. But that really helps in overall for everything. If you go to a meetings, from a meeting to a meeting, you get angry at one meeting, you go to the second one, it's going to affect the second meeting and so on. Like it's a never-ending story. So learning our emotions, like doing even the journal after this, you have that bad day at work, write down everything that what happened. You can come back to it when you're in a more neutral state, and you can see how your behavior changed from a meeting to a meeting or from an hour to an hour. So that's what I wanted to.
You can oftentimes I'll read through a stack or read through a journal entry. You can watch your emotional state change from the beginning to the end. The stack, the benefit of the stack is that's actually the point. I come into this feeling angry and then I come out of it feeling super happy and on a lift because here is this thing that triggered me. Here's the lesson that I'm supposed to learn from that thing that I needed to know right now. And I come out of it better, smarter because I got triggered. It's a beautiful thing. So this is a topic we could dig a lot more into, Pavel. But we've got about 6 minutes left. And we need to have some engagement here from Christian and Dave a little bit more. Pavel and I were talking. We are now on episode 12. Now, everyone who knows, who's listened and watched a little bit, most podcasts average, the average podcast length of every podcast ever created is 7 episodes. So we've made it, Pavel. We got past that. But now we ended up in the zone of, is it being effective, right? I enjoy the conversation with you. What is it we want to have from this podcast? And the reality is we know we want to get the message out to engineers and other intellectual workers that your brain is not all of you. We want to get the message out to team leaders that the people are not just cogs. You need to treat the team as an organization and develop and push into them, right? This is really a developmental podcast for engineers at a team level and on a personal. But what we haven't done really is we haven't really made a clear message that we always go back to, right? And what we haven't done is we haven't really given an option or a call to action for what we want out of it, right? If we just want to provide information, we continue to do what we can, and we build slowly, we get there. If we want to be able to create a space where we can have a Patreon and have people help support the money and the time we're putting in this podcast, we should have something there. If we want to take this and convert this into, hey, let's you and I run a consulting firm, which we've talked about in the past as an option. Let's run a consulting firm where we go in and we talk about how to build your team at a team level and how to build your team at a personal level, right? We, as podcast people, have not made a clear definition of what we actually want, which has created some interesting observations, right? So what Pavel and I discussed right now, we've got a couple things coming up next week and the week after. The next week is the 20th. I am going to be celebrating my wife's birthday on that night, so I'm not going to take time to podcast. And then the week after, we've got Christmas. So we've got 2 pretty big weeks here. The week after that is, as I said, right after Christmas, the 27th. And then the 3rd week there, Pablo, you've got some pretty heavy work activities. I'm going to be in Hawaii. We've got some different things going on. So what we're going to do is we will figure out a schedule. If we go live, it's not going to be live. So full disclosure, if we go live, it'll be pre-recorded, right? But it might be, we're going to be taking at least a week or 2 off on a break so we can kind of regather, reconnect, and get crystal clear on what we want. And so my ask, if you're watching this live, if you're watching this on a replay, Pavel and I want to know what's connected with you, right? We're going to go do some analytics on the show. We're going to look at what conversations were there. We're going to look at the comments. But what do you want to hear us talk about? We can talk about a large wealth of subjects, from physical fitness to nutrition to sleep and gratitude. We've talked about meditation. We've talked about journaling. We've talked about managing stress. We've had guests on. What do you want to see this become? Because as much as Pavel and I would love to get on here and talk every week for 30 minutes with a 15-minute prep and then whatever, it's important to us to have this time be relevant because we're both extremely busy. But it's also important that we bring value to the people who are watching. So my ask for everyone is to please comment with what you find valuable about this information, about the conversation, and what you want to see more of. That's my take. Pavel, what do you want to say? What are you looking for in moving forward? Let's just have the open conversation, right?
Yeah, of course. So I'm aligned with you. If you don't want to comment, feel free to send us a DM or contact us via email. That's also totally fine. You don't have to publicly say what you're thinking. But basically, we want to get closer to you and we want to speak about the things that you would like to listen. Because we have our own perspective on some things, but you as listeners are the people that are actually creating our audience. And we want to be connected with you. We want to build a rapport with you. So we want to know what you would like to know and what you would like to listen about. Do you want to, like Brandon said, maybe you want more guests. Maybe you want to focus more on team building. Maybe you want to focus more on personal development. What is it really that you would like us to talk about? Of course, we can pick our own topics, like we have a list. However, it's very valuable for us to hear your opinion. That's why I would like to really get the comments, or we would like to really get some messages from you that we know that we're delivering the content that you want to listen to and you're happy with the value provided.
Yep. And so, Pavel, I don't know if you see a comment. Dave, thank you for the engagement today. I really appreciate that. He said, I think that your message is relevant. So, Pavel, having dealt with engineers as a marketer and trying to market to engineers, this is huge because I think your message is relevant. As engineers, we don't like to have reflection. This is a general stereotype that is true. Take your time, family first. Thank you. Absolutely. Talk about it all again because our community does not like to comment. So I want to touch on this just a little bit. This is what we need, Pavel. This is really all we want. And I hope we get comments from other people. That's really what we want to talk about. But what I have noticed with engineers is engineers' engagement on social media. There are a few people who are a little bit more outward, but generally engineers who like or throw an emoji on a post, that's essentially saying, hey, I appreciate it. And I like that is the engineering equivalent to engagement and like commenting, right? I've had a lot of conversations where somebody just liked the post that I reached out, and me taking the next step to reach out because they put a reaction or emoji, that was them saying, hey, I'm willing to engage and have a conversation with you. That has led to a number of conversations. So Dave's 100% correct. Really what Pavel and I need to do, and Dave, thank you for that. We just need to figure out what we want this to be. What is our outcome? The message is relevant. Engineers need to be more reflective. Engineers need to recognize that your brain is not you. You're not your brain. You're your whole body, you. Your whole spirituality, you. You're your family and you're the impact that you have on the planet while you're here. Like you are the entire you of your being, not just your brain. And this message is so, so relevant and so important, but we need to be able to. Great, Christian. Thank you. We really need to be able to send the message and then get and understand what we want from it, right? And this is a learning for us. So, Christian, thank you again commenting. Dave, go Rams. I'm positively, Pavel and I were talking about before the podcast, like it feels like we're not making ground, but this has reaffirmed for me, Pavel, at least that we're making ground. Podcast is going to be a slow process. So we'll come up with it. We'll make some, we'll have some plans. We'll share with what we're doing. If you are watching live or on replay and you haven't gone to the Engineering Evolved page, please do that. That's going to help us let this podcast have its own place in its own home where we can actually build and grow it. One of the things I think we need to do, Pavel, and we'll talk about this more, but we call this a podcast, but we've been live on LinkedIn. I think we really need to, over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, I think we need to figure out how to get this going live on like a Spotify so that we can start to get that engagement in that conversation. Because I really do feel like we are relevant. We're having relevant conversation. It's important to our engineering community, and we just need to get it out there in different formats. So please help us comment what you like. Please help us comment what you want to see more of. And as a bonus question, again, breaking all the rules, because you're only supposed to have one call to action, would love to know everyone's favorite podcast channel. Is it Spotify? Is it Apple Podcast? Is it a different one that I'm unaware of? What's the one you go to that you want us to try and be able to put this on? Because I think we have an opportunity there. And look for more news from us as we figure out what to make this. We're not stopping. I'm not stopping. This is not done. But we want to make sure that we're getting out of it what we want to. And we want to make sure that we're able to provide service and information to those that we want to serve. So if I don't talk to anybody before Christmas, or if we don't have another episode before Christmas, I want to wish everyone a happy holidays, whatever that holiday is for you. Pavel, 12 episodes in, I very much appreciate you, sir. I'm so glad we're doing this. What would you like to say before we cast off for a little bit?
Likewise, Merry Christmas to those who celebrate Christmas, and happy holidays for anyone that's doing different things. And again, let us know what you would like to know, because we're very happy to share the information. We're very happy to help you, either in person, on the coaching sessions, in here. But we just would like to know that we're delivering the right message to you. That would be my take.
100%. All right, Pavel, thank you very much. We will let you know when we're back, and we'll send everything out. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.